If you know me at all, you'll know that I love outfit design. Take a look at any of my social media and you'll see that 99% of my posts are just fun outfits I like making for my characters. Thus, I've had a lot of people ask me how I design my outfits, and while I don't think there's a specific formula to making a good outfit design, I figured I'd try to explain what I think about when approaching outfits, as well as just some general tips. This video won't really be covering color too much, nor my specific process. If anything, those will be separate videos. This is more about conceptualizing designs and the way I think about design when getting into it. But with that out of the way, let's get into what we can classify as a good design. Honestly, approaching this topic felt tricky for me since I feel like using good or bad when describing designs kind of negates the whole purpose of concept art in the first place. What I mean by that is two different designs can have, let's say, super bright neon colors. If the character is meant to be a farmer in the 1800s, then you could say it's a bad design. But if the same character was, say, a DJ for a nightclub, then you could also say it's a good design. Really, I like using effective or ineffective when it comes to design. This is because what I think matters most and what the purpose of design is to communicate something. An effective design is able to communicate to the audience what the artist intends or what is needed for the story, and an ineffective one fails to do that. So whenever I approach a design, I think about my intent and what I want the design to communicate. That way I know what are the most important aspects of the character I need to consider, and this also allows me to better evaluate what an effective design for that character is. Some examples for intentions I might have when creating a character could be showing off their profession, communicating their time period, or maybe just trying to get their personality across. All this to say, the tips I'm going to give are just certain things I consider when approaching a character's outfit. You don't need to implement all of these into their wardrobe because maybe some of these things don't matter to you. These are just things to consider when figuring out how to best communicate the message you want to send with your character. But before we can fully get into the tips, I also just wanted to touch on some resources for references you could use for outfits. I'm often asked what I use for fashion references, and this is a pretty hard question to answer, since I get the majority of my references off Pinterest, as basic as that is. I really enjoy looking at other people's designs and especially searching up different styles of clothing on Pinterest, since I can usually find tons of interesting stuff on there. I'd highly recommend looking up different clothing styles on Pinterest and just exploring different styles you can implement into your designs. While not exhaustive, I included some links to different websites listing a ton of styles you can research into. Some of my favorites have to be glam rock, VK, and I also just really enjoy drag and avant-garde fashion too. As far as historical clothing can go, it's often best to consult museums and reputable sources rather than the first page of Google. These can often be saturated with Orientalist or inaccurate information. I mean, just try searching up Egyptian clothing and see how many Party City costumes show up. I don't typically do too many historical or cultural designs, but I do have a list of resources I've seen recommended by others. A lot of them are Eurocentric, but I did find some specifically for Black/African fashion. Feel free to leave any other resources in the comments below, and I'll add them to the list in the description, where you can find all these links. Otherwise, I don't have much to say in terms of other specific fashion references I can give, so let's just move on to the actual advice when it comes to outfit design. When designing outfits, I think of three things: context, style, and feel. I'll go over all of these in depth, but let's start out with exploring context first. This point encompasses a lot of other smaller points within it, but the overall gist is that the outfit should fit the context of the story or background. Some examples of this may be that the clothes align with a certain time period, age, or fit within the character's social standing. This also extends to practicality, fitting with their line of work and allowing for enough range of movement to fit their activity levels. That all might be hard to parse just by listing them out, so let's go over some examples in media and in my own art where these concepts are applied. As far as time period goes, this involves researching the type of clothing that the type of person you are creating would wear at the time. Like, modern bodyguards now wear much different clothing than knights did. You also want to think about culture, especially if the character is from a time period where traditional clothing would be worn regularly. This can also tie into social standing, considering what materials or colors they may have access to depending on the time period and their level of wealth. A great example of this is how purple is often associated with riches, given how expensive and rare it was in the past. One example of this in my own work that both ties into this concept and tells the backstory of one of my characters is through my character Mave's attire. You can immediately tell that he's wealthy just by looking at much of his clothing, which is extremely extravagant and utilizes a lot of jewelry and fancy fabrics. However, he has a past as a laborer, and thus his hands are damaged from those years of hard work. Knowing this, I include gloves in all his designs, hinting at his past and implying that he is ashamed of his past, enough to hide it from the public at all times. In this example, you can tell that I considered both his past and present social standing and how to reflect that in his attire, showing how you can really think of and play with these ideas to tell a lot about your character in just their choice of clothing. Going back to my list earlier, I often want to show my character's profession through their outfit choice. This is usually because it's a big part of their character, and I really enjoy thinking about how their profession reflects onto their clothing choices. For example, with this chef/graffiti artist design, I integrate things from both professions into his clothing. You can see the folded over apron in his design mixed with the street style and hood that you might see a graffiti artist wear. With things like the mask and goggles, along with easy to access sauces and spoons, I try to think practically of what he may need both as a chef and as an artist. Similarly, with my character June, you can likely tell both his past and present profession just by looking at him for a bit. If you couldn't guess, he is a current babysitter and past Yakuza member. And I achieved this by taking the patterned shirts often associated with the Yakuza and combining it with a cutesy apron full of baby supplies to show these in a very simple and concise way. Usually when it comes to incorporating profession into an outfit, I'll start by researching and listing out things a character may need for their profession, as well as consider the climate if they're, let's say, a farmer or a mountain climber. I'll often weave these things into their clothing as I go, giving them the necessary tools for their job. If you want some other examples of profession being reflected into outfit choice, you can look at Danganronpa. While not all of the outfits are effective as others, since the characters basically revolve around their professions, the designers generally do a good job communicating this through each character's outfits. Honestly, one of my favorite things is just looking at Danganronpa OCs and seeing if I can guess their ultimate just through their design. And I've actually made a couple Danganronpa OCs just to kind of like have a fun design exercise and see if I can properly show what their ultimate is. Lastly, when it comes to range of motion, you generally don't want to put your super athletic characters in the heaviest clothes imaginable. Not only that, but especially when it comes to knights, you really want to think about how the armor moves and functions when in motion. I've made my fair share of impractical armor just to look cool, but generally you should try to imagine the limbs and torso in motion, making sure if a character bends over they won't be stabbing themselves in the stomach with their armor. One of the critiques I got on this Butcher Gyaru girl from a concept artist at Overwatch is that her original arm really doesn't have any range of movement, unable to bend at all. So going back, I really thought about how it would bend in the construction of it, even going in depth in the reference sheet itself to show how it was put together. And in order to figure this out, I looked at a lot of real machinery and robotics to kind of figure out how it would be put together. This goes beyond outfit design and more into general concept art, but especially if your design were to be turned into a 3D model or animated, then practicality is something you really want to think about and can really show how much thought you put into the character as more than just a 2D drawing. But as I said earlier, intent matters. You can easily subvert any of these while still having an effective design. For example, maybe a character is a time traveler, thus deliberately having modern clothes in a past time period. One example of this I can think of is the beginning of Legends Arceus, where right away, by contrasting the player's clothes with the clothes of the village people, you can instantly tell the time discrepancy between your world and theirs. Another example of diverting from the contextual norm in my designs is my character Chet. I sometimes draw him in very cutesy, childish pink clothes despite his age. This both shows that he still considers himself young at heart and doesn't mind dressing unconventionally for his age, but it also reflects his relationship with his granddaughter, the person who influenced him to this style of dress. So of course, think about your intent first and foremost, and either abide by the context for your character or intentionally stray away from it to tell even more about your character. Honestly, this is one of my favorite things to consider, so I could really go on and on about it, but I'll move along with the next point to keep this video from being like an hour. I touched on this in the reference part of the video, but when creating outfits, I also consider style as a major factor in a character's wardrobe. What clothing style does your character have? Whether it's casual, goth, 90s, or just exclusively mascot costumes, style can tell a lot about your character. This can also tie into the context of a character quite well, like my model OC wearing high fashion inspired outfits because it suits his profession. Style also extends past just labeled fashion styles and onto personal preference. Going back to June, I feel like he preferred baggy baggy pants and would absolutely hate skinny jeans, as well as just gravitate more towards colorful clothes that fit his babysitter profession. And you can see this across all his outfits. Thinking about what types of clothes your character would enjoy not only fleshes them out, but can also help when creating multiple outfits for them. By researching specific styles or having preferences in mind, it's a lot easier to come up with different outfits by being able to follow a general look, keeping things consistent and in character for them to wear, but since styles can be diverse, you can still make each outfit unique. What I often do is look up tons of photos of a specific style and kind of take elements from different outfits to merge into one, or putting a spin on common hallmarks of a style. As an example, going back to my Gyaru Butcher character, I took elements of the Gyaru style like leopard print and added a spin onto it, making the blood on her apron resemble the leopard print rather than just playing it straight. And this is also another example of including her profession. But I think the best way I can show how style impacts design is through these outfits I made for both mine and my girlfriend's characters. You can see in this image both of them are using the same concept, an animal hoodie with hearts on it. But because both of them have different styles, one of them leaning more emo punk and the other with a more cutesy streetwear style fashion, they both look entirely different. Here's another example, with the two both wearing a sweater with stripes on it. Again, very similar concept, but a different look and execution because of their different styles. Hopefully this paints a better picture as to why I'm even talking about style and how it can really inform a character's wardrobe. But overall, style just really helps with cohesion and also generating ideas when it comes to outfits, as well as just working with context to tell the viewers more about the character. What a character makes you feel is such a nebulous concept that I had a bit of trouble properly describing it, but I'll definitely do my best. Feeling is what you immediately feel when you look at a character, what emotions it may evoke, or subconscious ideas it may put in your head. This is where silhouette, shape theory, color theory, and motifs fall under. Things that may not consciously be picked up by viewers, but can definitely have an effect on how a character is perceived. A lot of people know about silhouette, but in summary, it's the overall shape of the character. Something you can see if you fill a character entirely with black, negating all their features except the shape of their outline. Ideally, the goal is for the character to be recognizable just by their silhouette. Like you can see in this image here. Many of these characters are instantly recognizable by their unique shape. In fashion, silhouette is also used, highlighting certain parts of the body and playing with proportions, either being purposely asymmetrical or balanced, or highlighting certain parts of the body. This also ties in with shape theory, which is the concept that different shapes communicate different feelings. Triangles are often seen as sharp, dangerous, sneaky, or quick. Think of kind of like a knife. The pointed angles really contribute to this sharp feel. Squares are often seen as dependable and sturdy. I kind of think of it like a brick, something that's a foundation to a lot of buildings and thus associated with stability. Circles are usually associated with soft, peaceful, welcoming feelings due to the lack of hard edges. Using a lot of curves in a design has a similar effect to this. Now, that was a basic rundown of silhouette and shape theory, something I assume most of you know or can research deeper from other videos about, but these concepts can also be used when creating outfits. For this character, Raz, she's someone extremely sharp-minded and often angry. I incorporated this with shape language, her shawl making a general triangle shape, as well as the triangle earrings, clasps, and the jagged edges of said shawl. Even the braids resemble triangles. Of course, you don't have to be as obvious in your shape language as this design is, since I was also looking to incorporate some inside job-esque, vague Illuminati references into this design, but it still shows the general concept I'm talking about when it comes to outfit design. As far as silhouette goes, what I enjoy doing is giving characters large collars when I want them to feel more intimidating or grand. I think of it like birds or cats who puff up in order to appear larger and more intimidating, making their silhouette wider to produce a similar effect. Also, just generally exaggerating some proportions in the outfit can lead to more interesting silhouettes and a generally more interesting design. Drag gives me a lot of fun ideas for clothing, often playing with proportion and silhouette to the extreme. If you really want to make a fun design, definitely take a look at those. Now, color theory, similar to shape theory, also involves the idea that certain colors evoke certain emotions. Again, I won't be going in depth on each of those, but you can definitely utilize it when giving characters a specific feel. More mellow characters can have more muted tones in their outfits, and more bold, flashy characters can utilize bright colors. But even further than that, I sometimes like to think of colors associated with certain professions, tying back to context in character design. This surgeon character, despite straying from a surgeon's usual attire, still evokes a feeling of one due to the association of the profession with this teal color. I went for this color because it matches their scrubs, further demonstrating this character's profession through color. Now, all of those concepts I just discussed are usually brought up in general character design courses, so I don't feel the need to spend an exorbitant amount of time on them given how many resources exist covering those theories and how there's much better people to speak on them than me. But when it comes to specifically fashion, what I really find interesting is how texture can also contribute to the feel of a character. For example, when creating this Edward Scissorhands inspired outfit for my slasher character, you can see that I use this fur and cut up fabric to give a wild, dangerous impression. You can easily associate this with shape theory, given how both of these can resemble the sharp edges of triangles. Conversely, going back to the surgeon, I give him more baggy, round clothing. Again, it ties back to shape theory, but baggy clothing just generally gives the feeling that the character is someone more relaxed and nonchalant about their appearance, something associated with comfort. Fabric and its associations can really contribute to the feel of a character, whether it be loose, comfortable fabric or leather, often associated with biker gangs and danger. While this can certainly fit under a character's style, I think its association with shape theory is really interesting to think about when it comes to fashion. And last but not least, I also wanted to touch on motifs. A motif is a recurring thematic element which I often use to enhance my character's designs. While this doesn't 100% have to do with the feeling of a design, I figured I'd throw it in since it's something I use a lot to help me out when conceptualizing designs or make them cohesive. Sometimes a motif I include may be a shape, like a star, like how I incorporate it here in my flashy film director's outfit, especially present in the collar and pants. I also include the same shape in my angel character's outfits and hair in this series of outfits, extending further to a general space motif. It can also just be general objects that repeat in different ways in a character's outfit, like how this character has a motif of eyeballs and her brother has a motif of teeth and mouths. This carries into their other outfits, showing how motifs can really be useful when generating ideas for outfits. Usually, I use it both to symbolize a part of the character as well as make each outfit more interesting, adding a unique element that can separate it from everyday clothing and give the character something special. So, in summary, the feel of a character is the combination of many aspects of concept art and fashion theories, things that can elevate a design without the viewer even noticing. Using different associations we have with shape, color, silhouette, or texture can increase the effectiveness of a design tenfold. And with the help of motifs, you can add something unique to your character's outfits that can symbolize something important about them and give them much more depth. Honestly, there's so many things about clothing design I'd love to talk about. Part of me worries that too much of this video was me rambling about things I added in my own designs, but I really wanted to show how I think through my designs and give examples to explain these somewhat vague concepts. Context, style, and feel are all things I consider when approaching my character designs, and things that really give me ideas of where to start when it comes to outfit design. Of course, you don't have to use everything I talked about in every single design because again, you may not even need to communicate the character's profession or have an extravagant silhouette. My intent with this video was just to leave you guys with some things to think about if you're stumped, and also figure out what changes you can make if you're feeling like an outfit isn't properly communicating what you want it to. With that, I'll leave the video there. Thank you guys for sitting through another one of my rambles. I'm slowly trying to improve the quality of my videos and my scripts, so hopefully this was helpful and made some sense. I know I was a bit worried about it being a bit incoherent, but a lot of you have said that the way I explain things makes a lot of sense, so hopefully that's the case here. I really like breaking things down, both the way I think and just ways I think haven't been fully explained before, you know? Like, I guess an example is, I touched on it very briefly, but like with color theory and shape theory and such. Like, I feel like that's been talked about in so many different videos that I kind of wanted to approach this in a new way, because yes, those things are important, but sometimes people struggle with figuring out how to incorporate it. And I feel like sometimes having an intent when coming into a design is far more useful than just knowing all these theories, because if you don't know what you're trying to communicate, then how are you going to do that? A design can have like as much shape theory, an amazing silhouette, amazing use of shapes, but if it doesn't serve the purpose that you want it to, then I don't think it's an effective design. So hopefully this makes sense. I like to do some unscripted rambling. Leave any feedback below, and yeah, thank you again.